uh, learning about Richard Herzog's dissertation about the Nahua population. I will ask you all to really bear with me. I am doing the clicking for Richard. I'm advancing his slides as we go through the presentation. Richard is going to present from between 20 and 30 minutes, and then we will have a series of questions afterwards. So without further ado, Richard, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so when you just need me to advance the slide, just tell me next slide, please, and let me know if it's not working. All right?
Okay.
All right, thanks,
Great.
Richard.
Yeah. So yeah, first off, hello to everyone, and thanks so much to Brandy for the kind introduction, and yeah, to the whole project, the team for inviting me here. And I'm really glad to be able to talk to you here via from Germany in this through this online space. So the talk today is actually also, as you just heard, in part is tied to my earlier dissertation, but it's also part of a larger postdoc project that I've been working on for some years, which is more related to food transfer between Spanish America and Southern Europe. And the talk today is also part of an article that I'm working on with a colleague right now from Marburg, where I'm currently based at a collaborative research center there. And so in light of this, I'm also really looking forward to your ideas and feedback. The topics today on my talk, the title, as you can see, is Nahua Foodways, Maize is Tribute and Food Scarcity in Central Colonial Mexico. And I will present to you some ideas on food hierarchies between Western and Mesoamerican foods, and also more generally on transformation of such foodways, focusing on the example of maize. First, because of its great importance as a food staple in the region, and also so that I can try to have a specific focus for this shorter talk. Here for my structure today, I will first look more briefly at the pre-Hispanic period and focusing here on the role of maize. And from there on, then I will move to the colonial period, looking at maize as its use as a tribute, and also its role, how it was tied to uprisings, to riots. Apropos riots, in case if you hear my cat meow a little bit, I hope it's not any issue. So I will present to you more of an intro to this topic. It's not meant as a larger overview. Also, as you just heard now, my focus will be more really on central Mexico, which was then part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, as it was called then, and with a focus more from the 16th into the 17th century. I should also maybe mention some terms before diving in. The term Nahua, which is in the title, is more a current term used in research to designate all indigenous groups that speak the Nahuatl language. So which is still now it's the most common indigenous language in Mexico, still over 1 million speakers. And at the time of the Spanish, when the Spanish arrived, the dominant group, Nahua group, were the Mexica of Tenochtitlan, the capital, which is maybe better known today as the Aztecs, which is a bit of a historic term. So, and the Mexica then at that time were formed an alliance with 2 other groups, and they it was like a larger form of alliance that was still very much in expansion. I should also mention here that when I talk about this Nahua, it's not to designate one one uniform group, but really the Mexica, but there were really a multitude of various other groups and states. The scholars talk, for example, here of the importance of micro-ethnicity, that the local belonging was very important to each group with their own states, their own rulers. So from here, I will come to the pre-Hispanic period, focusing on maize. Maize has been and continues to be of great cultural and spiritual importance to many Mesoamerican indigenous groups, playing, for example, an important role in creation myths. In pre-colonial times, native people, we could say, had overall established a very varied, sufficient diet. And through natural resources, they could satisfy their nutrition needs, for example, with the consumption of the food staples of maize, squash, and beans as this trifecta, to which were added, of course, various other plants, vegetables, and so on. Meat was also formed part of the diet, for example, obtained through hunting, but was more of an addition to the main diet. Maize was also considered as a marker of development by many indigenous groups. We can notice this, for example, in early colonial codices by the Nahua, using paintings and glyphs. And these often would show the transition from a more nomadic living onto settlements through the phase of agriculture, which highlighted the cultivation of maize. Next slide, please.
Did that work or not really?
Not for me.
Sorry, let's try. How's that?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. So here I brought to you on this topic two early colonial images from codices from the mid to later 16th century. On the right-hand side, this is from a very early one, the Codex Mendoza, which is actually now in Oxford in a university library. And this shows you, first we have the mother who's sitting on the left, who is teaching, who's talking and teaching her daughter how to prepare maize tortillas in a traditional way. The other image on the left, this is from the Florentine Codex a few decades later, and it shows the gendered division of labor, we could say. Men standing who are responsible in this way for agriculture, for planting, and we have sitting also then women who are preparing maize. The focus to mention here another aspect would be creation stories. For example, there's the important one, early colonial story called La Leyenda de los Soles, which also shows this centrality of corn. In the story, we have the major deity, Quetzalcoatl, who is present for the creation of humans. But at this point, there's no nourishment, no food. So he then sets out on a quest to find some nourishment. And he ends up meeting ants who then lead him onto a special mountain where he finds various plants. And he then brings them back to the first humans, and this includes maize as a major, as an important plant. This metaphorical link, we can say, between people and maize is also made explicit in the Nahua term for maize, tonacayo, meaning our flesh. This derives from tona, meaning solar heat. And it shows us an understanding of maize as a metaphor standing in for the sun's warmth. Such links were also made quite clear in a Quiche Maya origin story from the Popol Vuh, where a deity then creates mankind out of corn dough. In such ways, we could say that Mesoamericans used stories and metaphors to connect the human body to the food nourishing it, and from there also to the universe. We can see here how seemingly abstract concepts become concrete through practice and rituals, with plants including maize that were consumed on a daily basis as reminders of one's place in the cosmos. Also, parallels in such cosmic processes were made out, for example, when juxtaposing celestial movements and biological rhythms on Earth. This could include the yearly cycles of plant generation, were then juxtaposed with the functions of the human body. So from these few insights now, I would like to move on, jump with you on towards the colonial period and to trace some developments here. So generally, I would say that at this time now, we're moving to the 16th century, and from then onwards, that colonial representatives tended to condemn indigenous food practices in various ways. One such argument that was used to justify social distance, but also racial difference, was to introduce a hierarchy between diets. So their European food was positioned as the only good or convenient kind of food. And diet was, and we could say maybe still is, also very much linked to Western medicine and Christian ideals and concepts of the body. And I'm drawing here, for example, on the work of Rebecca on these ideals. The Spanish saw themselves as the sole possessors of knowledge, science, and religion. Early on, also, they saw the consumption of European foods, including wheat and the Americas, as central to the diet, but also to Catholic rituals. But yeah, this included, of course, wine as well, and the planting of grapes or attempts to plant grapes. So eating American plants could even be considered dangerous and tied to fears of turning Indian. In connection with this, indigenous ways of working the land were also often replaced by European forms of agriculture, which were also considered superior. Yeah, so often even the idea that different forms of native forms of agriculture were not really considered real agricultural practices. So early on, also wheat was then planted on a larger scale because of this religious ties, but also with the cultural importance of bread in Iberia. Also, we can consider here other plants of European origin, including sugarcane, bananas, that spread very quickly early on and also changed the Mesoamerican diet. So in larger cities, especially where we have more of mixed population, there's also development then of a mixed or mestizo cuisine, combining European and American influences. At the same time, though, we can say that in most parts of present-day Mexico, and especially more in rural areas, the diet was more, and in some ways still is more, based on the staples of maize, squash, and beans. So from here, I will now come to the first of two case studies focusing on tribute and maize's role as an important tribute. So looking at some colonial transformations in the use of maize due to Spanish policies, but also looking then at conflicts resulting from these. Generally, in the economic sphere, maize remained important regarding tribute, but also and as a currency as well. In the decades following the Spanish invasion, the wealth of colonial society was largely built on indigenous production and work. Most Nahua would continue to cultivate maize early on, but also other subsistence crops, while also producing other goods still in traditional ways. Such items and also labor were exchanged through tribute, as well as a system of regional and local markets. And we then have in Central and the Valley of Mexico the case where settlements along the shore of the large Lake Texcoco would provide Mexico City, the colonial capital, with commodities and services. This was built on the ruins or on parts of Tenochtitlan, and also kind of built on similar processes where other settlements and towns would provide Tenochtitlan with food in pre-Hispanic times. Initially, then, early on, most native tribute went to the encomenderos, and just to briefly mention this here, so the encomenderos would have encomiendas, which briefly put, we could say, as this larger territory and right to indigenous labor, but which essentially then meant or turned into a slavery form of enslavement, and what would be replaced by the mid to later 16th century. And we then have, of course, also this sidelining, at this increasingly sidelining of encomiendas, but tied in combination with the massive indigenous demographic catastrophe. So this is called in this way in the literature, but meaning essentially the various factors coming together, including warfare, enslavement, forced labor, and illnesses that would lead to this millions of death and massive destruction of indigenous population. Before this background, then royal officials would start regulating tribute more from the mid-16th century onwards. Major reforms would separate labor from tribute assessments and also expanded the category of tributary. This also led to a reduction of payment from various goods or multitude of different goods in pre-Hispanic times to a fixed amount of coins and maize. In some cases, maize should even not be sold in markets anymore due to this importance now as tribute, which had always been the case before. So I would say the tribute system was then changed from one that was more closely based on pre-Hispanic modes to a system based on a uniform head tax. In pre-Hispanic times, for example, it was more of a graduated system. The tax would depend much more on what one person was earning. Whereas now, for example, it was more fixed, and nobles, Spanish officials were also exempt from payment. This role of maize as tribute in pre-Hispanic and colonial times we can glean again from early colonial codices, where such tribute payments are often depicted. Also in writing from annals, for example, indigenous scholars would in detail show different changes in maize payments. In some ways, they would also show a correlation between increases in tribute that was deemed too burdensome and discontent in native communities, which would then periodically lead to local uprisings, which is my next topic. Before this, the next slide, please.
One sec.
Yeah, so this is one again from the Codex Mendoza, and so on the left-hand side, I hope you can see it. It's a bit larger page. Shows various forms of tribute to the Mexica, who were dominant in pre-Hispanic times, and tribute from various other states that were tributary to them. And for example, maybe you can see here at the top there are some different blankets. In the middle there are clothes and forms of shields, for example, as well for warriors. And at the very bottom then we have crates of maize. On the left hand is maize, and on the right hand is a crate of beans and chia. So this is actually, it's indicated then in Spanish in writing on top of these paintings. And on the right hand side, it's a detail from another image, which again to show you a bit better these crates of maize. And also on the left, we have always then glyphs that symbolize the each state, so to show which state is expected to pay. Also, the image at the right, I just added here because I found quite interesting. On the bottom right corner, we have cochineal, yeah, so this red dye, which would already at that time become also very important as an expensive export. And next slide, please. So this was to show you, of course, already in pre-Hispanic times, this importance of maize tribute. Here we have then, this is again probably later 16th century from another region, from Tlaxcala, the lienzo de Tlaxcala, and the Tlaxcaltecs as a very important ally of the Spanish. And here we have a scene showing after the fall of Tenochtitlan, there's Hernan Cortés in the middle with, behind him there's Malinche Malintzin, the indigenous interpreter, very important. And he's coming here to another town in the Tlaxcala region called Xaltelolco, and somewhat to the south. And I'm showing this here then more to show you again, hopefully you can see a bit at the bottom, there's actually maize that is laid out then for the horses that are to feed them. And there are, on the middle, we have baskets of tortillas, yeah, so as gifts by the native lords who are at the right-hand side, as gifts to the Spanish. And also then birds, for example, as well. But yeah, to show early on already kind of the importance of maize as a gift, and then from then on as a tribute. So from here, I'm coming to my next last part, which is more on riots, uprisings, and tied in also again with the questions of maize and maize tribute. Periodic shortages of the maize, the staple food, would also contribute to riots in many major cities, including Mexico City and Tlaxcala, which I just mentioned in this period. Hunger, or also the fear of hunger, could fuel such events. European colonists in 17th century Mexico lived in constant fear of uprisings. For one thing, they made up more of a small minority overall, but even in urban centers. Europeans were thus far outnumbered by Amerindian people and also people of African descent and mixed populations. Also, many short-lived riots did take place also in rural areas as well, for sure. And they would often be caused by hunger crises, but also connected to misappropriation of resources, and other corrupt practices of colonial officials. And here I think we can draw interesting parallels, for example, with food riots in Europe that could be tied often also to such forms of misappropriation. As the indigenous population's main staple, maize also played a critical role in such crises tied, for example, to crop failures and mismanagement. So for the purpose of this talk, instead of some larger overview, I will focus in on two riots to give you a brief view on those. My first case here that I will mention is just to say we're moving ahead now in time, coming to the later 17th century. And the short case here, the first case was the short uprising in Tlaxcala, so to the south of Mexico City in 1682. Southwest. Here, east, sorry. Here, an order by the local administration decreed that only a small number of Spanish bakers would from now on be allowed to make bread and tortillas as well. This would restrict local tortilla makers and also indigenous tortilla makers, thus strongly limiting the city's food supply. The reaction that follows was very swift. After just a few days, people of all different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, started protesting this measure. So even Spaniards would start eating maize tortillas in this situation. And I have a quote on this. Next slide, please. So this comes from an anonymous Nahua historian. One second. Okay, and so he who was living there at the time. He's a direct witness, and this witness then he's saying how the uprising starts early on in September of the year. There was hunger. No more did either wheat bread or tortillas appear in either marketplace or shop. When anyone secretly made a carrying frame full, and took it to the marketplace, even if it was tortillas, the Spaniards just fought over it. Even though it was someone very honored, the indigenous people no longer respected them. Whoever was first took away the bread. Only weeping prevailed. And then everyone got worked up, priests, Spaniards, and indigenous alike, so that everyone took the side of the indigenous people. From here on, the source then describes a petition that was set up especially by the indigenous inhabitants and brought to the mayor, which then resulted quickly in the retraction of this order controlling bakeries. This short-lived uprising, I think, shows how swiftly hunger could lead to political action in the region. But it also shows how porous the borders between supposedly indigenous and European foods could prove to be. In times of crisis like this, the food hierarchy between wheat as European food and maize could also temporarily be overturned. Coming now to the second case study, which is focused on Mexico City, the colonial capital. In this case, we can see actually also the different, very differing causes of uprisings, which could include more local factors as well. In this case, we have the massive flooding of Lake Texcoco in this period, which tied in with corruption, contributed to a lack of food in the capital city. And so we are a few years later now in 1691. There was a actually this crisis had actually been mitigated by maize imports from another region, Chalco, to the south. But then we have Spanish officials who actually profited from these events by diverting resources and pouring fire on a crisis that had already been averted. Now we have a few days of hunger again, where a very large multi-ethnic crowd started moving through the city center and shouting, and they would then come to the main plaza square and started setting fire, for example, to the viceregal palace, the symbol of viceregal power, and also to other buildings that were symbolic of Spanish rule. Next slide, please. So, thanks. So, this is another quote. This is actually from a real scholar called Carlos de Sigüenza y Góngora, who was, again, a witness who was there at the time. And he describes these crowds coming through the streets. He said, "But the blacks, the mulattoes, and all the plebs shouted, 'Death to the viceroy and all those who defend him.' And the Indios, 'Death to the Spaniards and the Gachupines,' so meaning people coming from Spain, 'who eat our corn.' And they rushed into the square to accompany the others and to throw stones. 'Hey, señoras,' said the Indios to each other in their own language, 'we are going joyfully into this war. And as God grant that the Spaniards may die in it, it matters not that we die without confession. Is not this land ours? For what do the Spaniards want in it?'" So I showed the quote also because I really like it, and I think it's very interesting insight in maybe some of the motivations of the rioters, also protesting colonial rule, not the Spanish king, that was never possible, but the rule and corruption as well. But also you have the mention here of corn, of Spaniards are stealing, eating the people's corn. So these massive riots then lasted for about 2 days and were had to be dispersed by a larger army contingent. There were exemplary punishments used of some rioters as a form of deterrent. This is something that we find quite commonly with uprisings, where the idea usually was by the authorities not to make any massive large-scale executions or so, but to usually execute some people as a deterrent. The authorities at the time also put forth propagandistic ideas of a supposedly drunk native mob. They talk about pulque, how they would be fueled on pulque, to explain this event, also fueling European anxieties in this way. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just to show also this is painted a few years only after this massive riot, which was the largest in Mexico City in this period, showing kind of some of the destruction at the Zócalo, at this main square. Also, next slide, please. There's also then the viceregal palace, as I mentioned, that was parts of it were burned, which I just put here a kind of a detail to show this a bit more. Yeah, at the top. So from here I'll come to some brief conclusions. So firstly, what I've tried to show you in this kind of briefer, my talk, my overview here, are some continuities regarding maize. For example, continuities as its maize's major importance as a food staple, which is true until today, of course, in many regions in Latin America, as well as also maize's continuing spiritual significance. On the other hand, there were also important colonial era transformations. Of these, we can note, for example, how maize would be considered inferior to European plants by Europeans. We have also the continuing use of maize as tribute, but as I mentioned, we increasingly a very different form of tribute that was more standardized and more focused on maize and coins than other produce. And also we have then these events of maize that was, or the tribute also that was often mismanaged, leading to periodic shortages and influencing uprisings. Such uprisings could also then be used to express political discontent, as mentioned in this quote. So I would say, lastly, then, that we can measure the continuing value of maize to the Nahua in its intertwined influence as a staple food, as a tribute, but also as a cause for major discontent. Thank you very much.
So much, Richard, for that talk. I have used those codexes to teach in my classroom. I'm really grateful